world leaders have used their United Nations General Assembly speeches to condemn the deadly global wars. United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres is calling for international law to be observed. He slammed some states for disregarding human rights and decisions made by international courts. Let's speak now to the Professor or Dr. Oscar van Heerden. He is at the University of Johannesburg, and we speak to you, Dr. van Heerden, in anticipation of President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech at the UN General Assembly. He's yet to give that speech, but perhaps we can reflect on what he said yesterday at the roundtable discussion. I think much of it selling the GNU, which resulted out of the May 29 elections. How do you think that has gone down, particularly with the business community? I noticed today that some of the pictures of him sharing a word with one of the most talked about world business leaders right now, and that is someone who originates from South Africa, by the way, Elon Musk.
Yes, Collie. You know, the truth is that the president is there with a delegation of cabinet ministers and senior officials to try and sell South Africa. As he aptly said, he is there with the investment begging bowl, wanting to attract big business to come to South Africa and giving them a bit of a history as to where we come from. What the kind of South Africa we are in terms of what Nelson Mandela put in place with a constitutional democracy and a constitution that is hailed globally. And the fact that the majority party, and he was gracious to acknowledge it in the international forum, that the ANC lost its parliamentary majority, but that did not deter the ANC from forming a government of national unity with opposition parties in order to form a government and to take the country forward. He was allaying fears that the GNU is working. It's not something new. It has been done before, and that nothing has changed in terms of wanting to address the triple challenges that South Africa is facing in terms of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And the way to do that is to grow the economy and to get foreign investment to come into the economy. And so he touched on a few broad themes, but that was the real crux of it. They want investment.
Yeah, and still on that investment theme, I took particular interest in how he addressed the question around our minerals, the raw minerals that get extracted not just from South Africa, but most parts of the continent. And he says this colonial type relationship when it comes to our minerals, that has got to come to an end.
Absolutely. I mean, what the president was basically saying is that we have been talking about it for many years now in terms of beneficiation, in terms of our raw materials, growing our manufacturing base. This, it seems, when you look at leading economies globally, whether it is the Germans, whether it is the Japanese, whether it is the Taiwanese, the Chinese, etc., including the Americans, they have managed to keep their manufacturing base alive. And that's how they've been able to create employment and actually grow the tax base and so forth. So the president was emphasizing that it's time that we put that rhetoric of beneficiation into action. We need to build our own trains and locomotives. We need to build our own railway lines and so forth. We cannot just take the steel out of the ground and send it to China and then buy finished products. He didn't put it in those words, but that is really what he was saying, is that we need to begin to grow the manufacturing base within South Africa, and that is what's going to stimulate the economy.
Let's stay with matters affecting the continent, Dr. van Heerden. The Secretary-General at the United Nations, António Guterres, using his speech to reflect on some of the conflicts that are going on the continent, specifically Sudan and the DRC. I think Sudan possibly got a fair share of mention from him because that country right now going through famine whilst there is a brutal struggle for power. What is he saying about the world community when it comes to these conflicts and, I suppose, the silence?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think he's raising a concern that the world and world powers are not doing enough to try and, one, bring that conflict to an end, but also, two, address issues of famine and the likes. You know, the hotspots on the continent is South Africa as a government is integrally involved. As you know, Tolly, it is we've also deployed SANDF, South African National Defence Force personnel to the DRC. Former President Mbeki and the current DIRCO is involved in trying to find solutions in Sudan. We have invited the Ethiopians and the Eritreans to come to South Africa to resolve their tension around water as a resource and so forth, border disputes. So there is a number of hotspots. And of course, there's also what happens in the Sahel region. We see now the tensions with Burkina Faso, Niger, and others, and so forth. So, number of hotspots, and I think the Secretary-General was basically trying to say we need to put this on the agenda of the UN Security Council. These are matters that needs their attention, and they are not actually doing so. And that's the point that he was raising. Of course, as I say, the President Ramaphosa has also indicated that besides the hotspots, there's also a broader developmental agenda 2063 that African countries are involved in. There's an Africa Free Trade Agreement, which he's saying that it's time that investment comes to the continent.
Let's then talk about the president who runs one of the countries most powerful in the world, and that's the United States. Joe Biden has already given his speech. I'd like for us to take a listen to what he had to say around the Russia-Ukraine war. Let's take a listen.
The good news is Putin's war has failed and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with 2 new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. The world now has another choice to make. Will we sustain our support to help Ukraine win this war and preserve its freedom, or walk away and let aggression be renewed and a nation be destroyed? I know my answer. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away. And we will not let up on our support for Ukraine, not until Ukraine wins a just and durable peace in the UN Charter.
I'm not going to ask you a question around how he is addressing the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but I will ask you this, Dr. van Heerden. Do you think he should have been just as firmer when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East, given the fact that they are still firmly behind Israel and what they are doing in that region?
Yeah, look, I mean, the truth of the matter is that the world and the global south in particular has already seen the double standards that are there. If we look at how the Western world is looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how they're looking at Israel and Gaza conflict. We know that there are double standards. There's hypocrisy that's there. And in fact, it is the United States, more than any other country, that is protecting Israel and allowing Israel to violate international humanitarian law and to commit genocide in that part of the world. So it is a bit fresh for the president to be wanting to sound so stern and resolute when it comes to Russia-Ukraine, but the silence is deafening when it comes to the genocide that's happening in Gaza. And on that score, Polly, I also do think that even though the president of the most powerful country in the world has expressed himself in that particular way, it is in fairyland. I think it's important to say there is no outcome where Ukraine wins this war. To peddle this absurdity continuously, it doesn't make it a reality. This war must end. It must stop. The sooner it stops, the better it is for the Ukrainian people and for the Ukrainian sovereignty. Because what's happening there, people are just dying senselessly, and that dying needs to stop.
Yeah. Perhaps as a parting shot, Biden's time in office is winding down. The Middle East conflict, is that going to be a blot on his legacy, shall we say?
Well, I think that it's definitely going to be a blot on his legacy, but I don't expect any incumbent to have a change of heart with regards to the plight of the Palestinian people in both the West Bank and Gaza. Whether Kamala Harris comes in or whether Trump comes in, the support for Israel is going to continue. We need a different solution. It is commendable. And it's interesting how everyone is very silent on the issue of South Africa having taken Israel to the ICJ, the International Criminal Court of Justice, because I think it is those kinds of measures and other pressures and sanctions against Israel that is going to bring an end to that unfortunate situation.
Well, we're going to have to wait and hear what the leader of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, will have to say specifically about the actions that our country took when it comes to the ICJ that you just mentioned. Dr. Oscar van Heerden, thank you very much for the time being. He is with the University of Johannesburg.